The sun was just rising over the quiet town of Elmridge. In the pale orange light, the sidewalks shimmered faintly with morning dew, and birds, small, determined creatures, hopped from tree to tree as if rehearsing the choreography of daily life. No one noticed the man in the green hoodie, jogging slowly down Maple Street. His name was James, mid-30s, average height, worked in insurance. But what made James different wasn't what anyone could see. It was what he had quietly decided 3 days ago while brushing his teeth and catching his tired eyes in the mirror. I'm going to change my life, one habit at a time. But not like before. Not the New Year's kind of change, full of noisy declarations and dramatic gestures. This time, it would be tiny, silent, invisible even, because James had just read a book that whispered something most advice books shouted. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. Atomic Habits. The title sounded like science fiction, but the message was simple and revolutionary. It wasn't about massive change overnight. It was about tiny shifts repeated daily, a 1% improvement again and again. James had never thought of habits that way before. Like most people, he'd always believed change meant effort. Huge, draining, sweaty effort. Wake up at 5 a.m., go vegan overnight, run 5 miles a day, all or nothing. But every time he tried that, it ended the same way. Burnout, excuses, and quiet disappointment. But this was different. He slowed to a walk and pulled out a crumpled paper from his pocket. His own scribbled plan. 4 simple things. 1. Wake up at 6:30 instead of 7. 2. Drink water before coffee. 3. Read 2 pages of Atomic Habits after brushing teeth. 4th journal. 1 sentence every night. Nothing dramatic. Nothing heroic. Just tiny atomic changes. As he sipped from his water bottle, he remembered one of the first lessons from the book. The idea that true behavior change is identity change. That you don't just try to run, you become a runner. You don't try to read, you become a reader. Every small action, a vote for the person you want to be. He smiled at that, because the James from last week wouldn't be here, jogging at sunrise, remembering quotes from a book. But the James from this week was casting a new vote, and votes, when cast consistently, start to win elections. Back at home, he flipped open the book again, sitting at his kitchen table with a steaming mug of coffee. The house was still, just the sound of a ticking clock and the faint rustle of pages. He paused at a line he'd underlined the day before. Habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. It struck him, again, because he understood compound interest. Money doubling quietly over time. Slow growth that suddenly becomes exponential. But he had never thought of effort or consistency that way. If you get 1% better each day for a year, you'll end up 37 times better by the end. But if you get 1% worse each day, you'll decline nearly to 0. Tiny choices, invisible ones, but they stack. He glanced at the dirty dish in the sink. Just one. he rose quietly and washed it. One vote for the person I want to be. He knew he wouldn't feel different today, maybe not even tomorrow. But that wasn't the point. The goal wasn't perfection. The goal was trajectory. James thought back to what the author had called the plateau of latent potential. That awkward phase when you're doing the right things but seeing no results. Like planting a seed and staring at the soil, wondering if you're failing. That's where most people quit. Right before the breakthrough. He wouldn't, because now he knew breakthroughs are never loud at first. They arrive like whispers, like mornings, like habits. As the clock hit 7 a.m., James closed a book and looked outside. The light was sharper now. Children walking to school, a woman with a briefcase waiting at the bus stop. The world was waking up, unaware that something had shifted, not out there, but in here, in him. And all it had taken was a sip of water before coffee. The door creaked gently as James stepped into the office. The familiar scent of burnt coffee and disinfectant greeted him like every Monday morning. Fluorescent lights buzzed above as he nodded to Cheryl at reception and made his way to his desk. Second cubicle from the window, across from the microwave no one cleaned properly. As he sat down, he pulled a yellow sticky note from his wallet and stuck it to the corner of his monitor. Be the kind of person who shows up. A line straight from Atomic Habits. He didn't write it for flair. He wrote it to remember. Because that was another truth the book had taught him. Motivation is overrated. Environment matters more. It's easier to build good habits in a supportive space, and harder when your surroundings pull you the other way. He looked around. The vending machine blinked its neon options like candy-colored temptation. His phone buzzed with a new notification. Even the stack of reports on his desk threatened to drag him into old patterns. React first, overcaffeinate, and bury himself in busyness until lunch. But today, James paused. The book had called it cue awareness. Every habit begins with a cue, something your brain notices that kicks off a routine. And once you become aware of your cues, you can design your response. Instead of reaching for his phone, James slid it face down into the drawer. Instead of grabbing a bag of chips from the machine, he opened the top drawer where he had stashed almonds and a protein bar. Small decisions, practically invisible, but that was the point. Your habits shape your identity, and your identity shapes your habits, he thought, recalling how the book looped those two ideas like a feedback circle. Change the habit, slowly change the identity. Change the identity, habits begin to stick. He wasn't trying to act healthy anymore. He was becoming the kind of person who is healthy, one almond at a time. That afternoon, he joined his co-worker Alan for lunch. They usually grabbed sandwiches and talked about fantasy football or office politics, but today, James brought his own salad. Alan raised an eyebrow. Trying to lose weight? James shook his head, chewing. Trying to cast better votes? Alan stared blankly. James chuckled. Tiny habits, you know. Compound effect. Alan nodded vaguely and returned to his sandwich. James didn't mind. He wasn't doing it for applause. He was doing it for consistency, because that was something else the book made clear. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be consistent, even when no one sees it, especially then. He thought of the 2-minute rule. Any new habit should take less than 2 minutes to start. Too many people aim too high. I'll read for an hour a day, and when they can't, they give up. But if your goal is to just open the book, that's something you can always do. And once the book is open, maybe you read a page, maybe 2, maybe more. It's not about the amount. It's about the momentum. That night, as he stood at his bathroom sink, brushing his teeth, James smiled faintly, not because of anything big, just the simple comfort of routine. He'd read 2 more pages, written 1 sentence in his journal. And even though the day had been ordinary, it felt like something was building. He remembered another insight from the book. Habits are like a tree's root system. You don't see it grow day to day, but below the surface it anchors deeper, strengthens silently. And sometimes the work you're doing now won't show until much later. He looked into the mirror again, the same way he had the week before. But this time, his reflection wasn't a tired stranger. It was someone becoming. The following morning began with the same sound James had grown oddly fond of, the kettle hissing in his kitchen, pouring steam into the still air. He reached for his favorite mug, the one with a faded mountain print, and filled it with warm water before his coffee. It was habit now, simple, automatic. That, he thought, was the magic. Habits don't need motivation once they're part of your identity. You just do them, like breathing, like brushing your teeth, like drinking water from a mountain mug at sunrise. He sat down at the table, flipping open Atomic Habits to a line he had highlighted in orange. Environment is the invisible hand that shapes human behavior. He looked around his kitchen. The fruit bowl now sat on the counter instead of buried behind cereal boxes. His books were stacked neatly where the remote control used to be. There was a small whiteboard on his fridge that said, "Make it obvious. Make it easy." Every change in his environment whispered a new direction. He remembered how the author explained it. If you want to watch less TV, unplug it. If you want to read more, leave a book on your pillow. If you want to eat healthier, don't keep junk food in the house. Don't fight your old habits. Design around them. James reached for his journal and scribbled, "Design beats willpower every time." He thought back to the night before. He had nearly fallen into an old pattern, staying up late watching reruns. But instead of collapsing onto the couch like usual, he paused. His book was already there, next to his favorite blanket. That was all it took. One small nudge in the right direction. He read for 20 minutes and fell asleep early. No willpower, just a better setup. On the walk to work, James noticed something else. The city had patterns, too. The same man jogged past him with his German shepherd every day. The barista in the corner cafe was already pulling espresso shots at 7:05 a.m., humming softly to herself. An older woman fed the pigeons at the same spot on Elm Street, tossing seeds in elegant arcs like a priest with incense. Everyone had their own rhythms, their own loops. Cue, routine, reward. It made him wonder how many of our habits are things we chose, and how many just happened to us. Back in the office, James greeted Cheryl with a warm smile and placed his lunch in the fridge. His sticky note was still there on his monitor. Beth, kind of person who shows up. He sat down and opened a new document titled Habits I Want to Build. He didn't list goals. He listed identities. I am a person who keeps promises to myself. I am someone who moves his body daily. I am a person who reads to grow. I am someone who reflects, not reacts. He knew what the book said. Focus on who you wish to become, not just what you want to achieve. Because goals have an end. But identity, that lasts. He recalled the example James Clear used. If two people are offered a cigarette and one says, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit," while the other says, "No thanks, I'm not a smoker," the second person owns a new identity, and that changes everything. James smiled to himself. He wasn't trying to be disciplined anymore. He was disciplined, one quiet vote at a time. That night, after a quick dinner, he felt a familiar resistance tug at him. The couch looked tempting. The TV remote called his name. His brain whispered the old scripts. Just relax. Just one episode. You've earned it. But then he remembered the concept of friction. Make bad habits harder. Make good ones easier. So he walked over to the TV and did something radical. He unplugged it. Then he placed a sticky note on the screen. Will this help the person I want to become? He wasn't anti-TV. He was pro-intention. Instead, he opened his laptop and began typing. A short blog post about identity-based habits. Just thoughts, observations, nothing fancy. But it felt good to create, not just consume. By 9:30, he was in bed, reading again. He had no idea if anyone would ever read his blog. But that wasn't the point. He was showing up for himself. And in that quiet act, something powerful was happening. Change, not explosive, but constant. Not cinematic, but steady. Atomic. The soft vibration of James's phone woke him before the alarm. It was a message from his sister. How's the habit stuff going? Still waking up early? He smiled, thumbed a quick reply. Yep, day 10, and sat up. Not because he had to, but because it felt right now, natural. His body was adapting to the rhythm, his mind no longer needing to bargain with itself to get moving. This was what the book called the power of automaticity, reaching the point where your actions are no longer a decision, but a reflex. Habits that once required mental energy now flowed with ease. He rolled out of bed, walked into the kitchen, and flicked on the kettle. Same mug, same water before coffee ritual. The quiet joy in the routine wasn't flashy, but it grounded him. As he sipped, he recalled one of his favorite ideas from Atomic Habits. The 4 laws of behavior change. 1. Make it obvious. 2. Make it attractive. 3. Make it easy. 4. Make it satisfying. Each law was a lever to design habits that stuck. And this morning, James wanted to focus on that last one. Make it satisfying. The human brain is wired to respond to immediate rewards. We're not motivated by long-term health. We're motivated by the rush of sugar, the comfort of a couch, the instant hit of dopamine. That's why bad habits stick so easily. They reward us now. Good habits, on the other hand, their rewards are often delayed. The salad doesn't taste as good as fries. Reading a chapter doesn't feel as fun as scrolling TikTok. Going for a run rarely delivers instant six-pack abs. But what if, James wondered, we made good habits more satisfying in the moment? He flipped to his notebook and opened to a blank page. At the top, he wrote in bold, Habit Tracker. Below, he listed the habits he was building. Drink water before coffee. Read 2 pages. Write 1 journal sentence. 20-minute walk. Each habit had a little checkbox beside it, and each check mark felt like a tiny win, a satisfying ping in his brain. This, he realized, was what the author meant. When you track a habit, the act of checking it off becomes its own reward, visual proof of progress, a reminder that you're showing up. That evening, after finishing dinner and wiping down the counter, James grabbed his pen and checked off the last habit of the day. Ping! He felt it, small, but real. He added a little gold star beside it just for fun. Maybe it was silly. Maybe it was childish. But it worked. The next day, he caught himself glancing at the tracker throughout his morning. It pulled him forward. He didn't want to break the streak, and that, too, was a lesson from the book. Never miss twice. It's okay to skip once. Life happens. But skip twice, and you risk sliding into a new habit, not doing the thing. James remembered how the author had described it. Missing once is an accident. Missing twice is the start of a new pattern. So he didn't skip. Even on the day when his meeting ran late and he felt exhausted, he still scribbled a 1-sentence journal entry before bed. Tired today, but I showed up anyway. And that felt like a victory. The next morning, walking through his neighborhood, he passed a house with a small construction crew in the yard. They were laying the foundation for a new porch. One worker stood with a measuring tape while another poured concrete into a wooden frame. James stopped for a second, watching the process. It looked slow, repetitive, not glamorous, and yet it was necessary. Without a solid foundation, nothing elegant could stand. He smiled. It was just like building habits, pouring concrete. One line, one representative, one routine. Most of the beauty, he realized, happens after the structure is complete. But the strength? That comes from what's underneath. Later that week, Cheryl from the office poked her head over the cubicle divider and said, "Hey, James, What's this new blog you're writin'?" James blinked. "Oh, just a thing I started about habits, sort of journaling out loud." "Well," she said, "I read your post on identity. It stuck with me." He looked up, surprised. "You did?" She smiled. "Yeah, I started drinking tea instead of soda at work." Day 3. That night, James opened his laptop and wrote a new entry. It began, "Sometimes change happens quietly, but sometimes it echoes." And as he typed, he checked off another day in his tracker. Another vote, another pour in the foundation. Satisfying. The morning fog hung low over the pavement as James tied his shoelaces tighter and stepped into the chill. It wasn't cold enough to bite, just enough to remind him he was awake. The neighborhood was still rubbing its eyes. Cars with fogged windows, front lawns littered with yesterday's leaves, porch lights still flickering from overnight. He walked instead of jogging today, not because he didn't feel like moving faster, but because walking let him see things, think, notice. He'd read in Atomic Habits that awareness is the first step to improvement. And now that he was paying attention, he saw patterns everywhere. The mailman always waved at the same 3 houses. A woman 2 blocks over watered her roses at the same time each morning. Even the dog behind the metal gate barked with military punctuality. These weren't random. These were habits, too, just expressed in different lives. As he turned the corner, he recalled another core idea from the book: habit stacking. The method was simple. Tie a new habit to an existing one, like a chain, like stepping stones across a stream. If you already brush your teeth every morning, stack a new habit right after, the author had written. Brush your teeth, then read 1 page. That's how you build a bridge. James had tried it the night before. Right after brushing, he did 10 push-ups. Not 20, not 50, just 10. No fanfare, no app, no accountability partner, just the floor and his breath. This morning, he did 11. It wasn't about the number. It was about the signal. The habit was beginning to stick because it wasn't floating alone anymore. It was anchored to something. When he got back home, he opened his notebook and revised his plan. After I brush my teeth, I will do 10 push-ups. After I pour my coffee, I will read 1 page. After I eat lunch, I will take a 5-minute walk. After I close my laptop at the end of the day, I will write 1 sentence in my journal. Each line a domino, each action leading to another. That's how habits grow, through connection. James remembered how the book described neurons firing together in the brain. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Each time you repeat a habit, you carve a groove a little deeper. It becomes easier to return to it next time. Like water, finding the same path down a hill. He sat on the edge of his bed and smiled. These weren't just isolated goals anymore. They were systems. Later that afternoon, during a lull at work, James noticed something strange. He wasn't craving his usual vending machine snack. In fact, he hadn't thought about it all day. He remembered something the book had emphasized. Every behavior has a surface-level craving and a deeper underlying motive. You don't really want chips. You want relief. You want stimulation. You want a break. And if you can fulfill that need in a healthier way, the craving loosens its grip. That's why James had started standing and stretching every hour, not because he loved stretching, but because it gave him that same sense of relief without the salt and regret. He walked over to the kitchenette, filled his water bottle, and did a slow stretch as he waited. It felt enough. The old craving faded, not because he fought it, but because he'd redirected it. That night, as he updated his habit tracker, he felt something shift, a line he hadn't written yet, a realization. Your future is hidden in your daily routine, not in your dreams, not in your 5-year plan, but in what you do on a random Wednesday at 8 p.m. when no one is watching and no one will know. He reached for a fresh page in his notebook and titled it simply, "What I'm Really Building." And beneath that, he wrote, "A body that moves without pain, a mind that doesn't spiral at stress, a morning that feels like peace, a night that ends with satisfaction, a life where I trust myself to follow through." He underlined the last line twice, because more than anything else, this is what Atomic Habits was giving him. Not hacks, not shortcuts, but trust. The trust that he could build a life he didn't need to escape from. Not all at once, but one small stacked habit at a time. The wind rustled through the leaves with the kind of sharp edge only late autumn carries. James pulled his jacket tighter as he walked past the bookstore, where the window display had already shifted to winter reads. He paused just long enough to smile at the irony. Books about hibernation and stillness, piled in towers of ambition. He thought of the quote again, "Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become." That had stuck with him since page 1. It had rewired how he thought about the smallest things. Every push-up wasn't just exercise, it was a vote. Every salad a vote. Every skipped episode at night, every early alarm, every choice to pause instead of react. Each a vote. Votes, he'd realized, didn't need to be unanimous. They just needed a majority. That morning, James had slipped. His alarm buzzed at 6:30, and instead of rising, he tapped snooze twice. When he finally sat up, guilt tried to sneak in, like a fog rolling through the cracks. But instead of beating himself up, he remembered something the book had emphasized again and again. Missing once is an accident. Missing twice is a new habit. So he got up, still poured the water before the coffee, still read 2 pages, still checked the box, because he'd learned one imperfect day doesn't erase progress. It only matters if you let it spiral. He scribbled in his journal, "Started late, still showed up, that counts." The phrase had become something of a mantra. At work, Cheryl leaned over with a granola bar. "Hey, You ever read that habits book? You seem really into this routine stuff lately." James grinned. "Atomic Habits? Yeah, that's the one. I'm on my third read," he said. "It's changing how I live." She tilted her head. "How so?" He paused, thinking. "It's like, I used to think change was about motivation or willpower, but it's really about systems, tiny ones. You don't fix your life, you fix your habits. Your habits fix your life." Cheryl blinked. "That's actually kind of deep." James chuckled. "Yeah, the book's full of it." That night, James opened his notebook and turned back to the page he'd titled, "What I'm Really Building." He added one more line. "A system that works even when I don't feel like it." Because he knew now, emotions are temporary, systems are stable. When you can act without relying on motivation, you've won. And the key to that? Automation. He recalled another core principle from the book. Reduce friction. If a habit is hard, you'll resist it. If it's easy, you'll repeat it. That's why he kept his journal by his bed, why his push-up space was cleared by the wall, why his healthy snacks were in the front of the fridge and his phone charger now lived in the kitchen, not his nightstand. He wasn't trying to change his behavior every day. He was changing his default. The less energy a habit took to start, the more likely he'd continue it. And then came the thought that stopped him mid-sentence. What about the bad habits? He knew how easy it was to scroll for hours, to snack mindlessly, to delay sleep for one more video, one more dopamine hit. He hadn't just built good habits this year, he'd also inherited bad ones, unintentional ones. Habits born out of fatigue, out of boredom, out of autopilot. The book had a solution for that, too. Make bad habits harder. Increase friction. James stood up, walked over to the living room, and unplugged the TV again. He picked up his phone and set a 15-minute screen time limit for social apps. Then he opened a drawer and tossed the remote inside, shutting it with a firm click. He wasn't punishing himself, he was raising the cost. Later, when his hands instinctively reached for the remote and came up empty, he didn't panic. He just smiled, walked back to his notebook, wrote : "I made the wrong thing harder. That's progress, too." He'd always believed discipline meant gritting your teeth, but now he knew it also meant rearranging your space, so your future self didn't need to make as many hard decisions. By bedtime, he had another streak intact, not perfect, not heroic, but intact. And in the quiet hum of his apartment, James realized something important. The best habits don't feel like rules. They feel like kindness to your future self. A soft drizzle fell the next morning, painting the sidewalks in rippling gray. James stood at his window, hands wrapped around his coffee mug. Yes, after water. And watched as the raindrops patterned the glass in slow, deliberate beats. There was something comforting in the rhythm, predictable, steady, like habits. The previous night had been quiet. No scrolling, no TV, just a book, a dim lamp, and a body that felt at peace. It hadn't been dramatic, no grand revelations, no cinematic breakthroughs, but it was calm, and calm, James had learned, is its own kind of victory. He glanced over at his whiteboard, now more cluttered with scribbles than before. One quote stood out, written in his quick, looping script. "You don't have to be the victim of your environment. You can be the architect of it." That idea had reshaped the way he lived in his own apartment. He now saw every object not as decoration, but as a trigger. The couch was a cue for comfort, so now it had no remote nearby. The kitchen counter, once cluttered with snacks, now held his journal, a bowl of fruit, and his favorite pen. He wasn't just redesigning his space. He was reshaping his identity, because that was the quiet, recurring wisdom in atomic habits. If you want lasting change, you need to believe differently about yourself. James wasn't trying to be productive anymore. He was simply someone who created, someone who moved, someone who chose awareness. The process was gradual, layered. He remembered how the book had described change as layers of an onion. The outermost layer was outcomes. I want to lose weight. The next layer was processes. I'll exercise and eat better. But the core, the true driver, was identity. Who are you becoming? Because when your behavior aligns with your identity, habits stop being chores. They start being acts of confirmation. That morning, James opened his laptop and began typing. He wasn't sure if his blog mattered to anyone but him, but that didn't matter. He wrote not to impress, but to express. His post began. When I first tried to change, I chased results. But now I chase alignment between what I do and who I am becoming. It felt honest. He hit publish, stood up, and stretched. The habit now automatic. One hand on the chair, one reaches toward the ceiling, a quiet yawn pulling through his chest. Later that day, he had a Zoom meeting with his team. As usual, there were technical hiccups, a few awkward silences, and one heated moment over a missed deadline. But James noticed something different in himself. He didn't react immediately. He responded. He paused, breathed, spoke with clarity. That, too, he realized was a habit. Emotional regulation, as much a practice as anything else. And one of the most underrated ideas in the book flashed in his mind. Every habit is an entry point into a new identity. Even the invisible ones, especially the invisible ones. After work, James decided to walk without headphones, no music, no podcasts, just footsteps on wet pavement and the hum of the world around him. His thoughts wandered, but not aimlessly. He thought about effort, how most of his life effort had meant pushing, hard, fast, loud, but now effort felt different, subtle, intentional, rooted. He wasn't burning out. He was building up. That evening, his sister called. They hadn't spoken in a while, not properly. She sounded tired. She'd been trying to juggle her job, her kids, and a fitness routine she couldn't seem to stick with. "I just don't get how you're doing it," she said. I always start strong and then fall apart. James listened quietly, then said, "Start smaller." "Smaller than 10 minutes?" she asked. "Start with putting on your shoes," he said gently. "That's it. Don't worry about the workout. Just cast the vote. The rest can follow later." She was quiet on the line for a beat, then said, "That's weirdly comforting." "It's not about heroic days," he told her. "It's about not breaking the chain." When they hung up, he added another note to his tracker. Encouraged someone else to begin, because habits weren't just reshaping his own life anymore. They were spilling outward, and that perhaps was the most satisfying habit of all, becoming the kind of person who makes it easier for others to believe they can change too. James stared at the blank page on his screen for a full minute before typing a single word. Slump. Not because he was feeling dramatic, just honest. For 2 days, he hadn't checked off his habits. No journal, no walks. His water before coffee ritual had quietly been replaced by groggy reaches for caffeine. He hadn't done his push-ups. He hadn't read. He hadn't even unplugged the TV. Just let it glow in the background like a lullaby of distraction. And it was okay, because this time the spiral stopped after 2 days. Not 2 weeks, not 2 months. This time he noticed, and that, he realized, was growth. He opened Atomic Habits to the page he'd dog-eared weeks ago. The most effective way to change your habits is to focus not on what you want to achieve, but on who you wish to become. He wanted to be the kind of person who didn't let a bad stretch define the whole journey. He wanted to be resilient. That word became the title of his next blog post. Resilient doesn't mean perfect. He wrote about how habit building isn't linear, about how success doesn't come from never falling off. It comes from returning faster each time you do. The idea was reflected in one of the book's lesser-known gems. Standard is not perfection. Standard is the level you return to. James had a new standard now, and 2 off days didn't erase it. After hitting publish, he walked over to the whiteboard, erased his old tracker, and redrew the calendar grid. Instead of streaks, this time he used a simple mark system. X for completed. O for partial effort. For missed. There was power in seeing it all laid out, not to judge himself, but to reflect, to learn, because data wasn't criticism, it was information. He remembered another idea. Habit tracking makes habits satisfying. It adds a bit of reward to something that might otherwise feel thankless. That evening, he set the bar low again. He read just 1 paragraph, did just 5 push-ups, wrote just 1 line. Today, I turned the ship back toward the shore, and it felt like a win. He was reminded of how the author compared habits to steering a plane just a few degrees off course. At first, it looks like nothing, but over miles, those few degrees can change your destination entirely. That's what habits were, course correctors, James didn't need to be flying at full speed. He just needed to steer right. At work the next day, Alan stopped him near the water cooler. "You still doing your micro-routines?" he asked, slightly amused. James nodded. "Even when I don't feel like it." Alan raised an eyebrow. "Why?" James paused, then said, "Because I'd rather be someone who shows up imperfectly than someone who quits perfectly." He wasn't sure where the sentence had come from, but it felt true. That afternoon, during his lunch walk, James reflected on another favorite line from the book. "Success is the product of daily habits, not once-in-a-lifetime transformations." It wasn't the TED Talk, the breakthrough, the viral post. It was brushing your teeth, packing your lunch, journaling even when you have nothing to say. Repetition was the master. Volume was the path. It was something he'd resisted for so long. He'd always wanted things to feel different. But now he saw that real change doesn't always feel revolutionary. It just starts to look different over time. A cleaner space, a steadier breath, a lighter mind. That evening he cooked a simple dinner. No distractions, just chopping, stirring, tasting, mindful, present. He left his phone across the room and played a jazz playlist that had quietly become a cue for slow down. Another accidental habit, one he now appreciated. After eating, he opened his notebook, not to reflect this time, but to plan. Not a rigid, color-coded system. Just 3 questions. What's working? 2. What's slipping? 3. What do I need to adjust? His answers were short. Working, morning water, writing when I don't overthink. Slipping, movement, TV boundaries. Adjust. Prep clothes for walks in advance. Put TV remote away again. Simple, tactical, real. This was habit mastery, he realized, not just doing, but reviewing, adjusting the system like a gardener pruning leaves, not because the plant is failing, but because you want it to thrive. And as he turned out the lights that night, James smiled, not because he was proud of being perfect, but because he finally understood the quiet power of starting again. James stood in the grocery store aisle, a bag of chips in one hand, a small pack of almonds in the other. He didn't need either, but the afternoon slump had crept in, quiet and familiar. He didn't reach for logic or guilt. He reached for clarity. What am I really craving right now? It wasn't salt. It wasn't crunch. It was a break. And that was another echo from Atomic Habits. You don't crave the habit itself. You crave the change in state it delivers. You don't crave brushing your teeth. You crave a clean mouth. You don't crave meditation. You crave calm. You don't crave checking email. You crave the relief of certainty. So James put both snacks back, walked out, and sat on a bench under the maple tree outside. He took 3 long breaths and let his eyes close for 30 seconds, and the craving passed. That night, he shared the story in a blog post titled, "Choose the State, Not the Shortcut." It wasn't flashy or profound, but it felt honest. Someone commented within an hour, "Wow, That explains so much about my doom-scrolling subscribed. James smiled. He didn't care about followers. He cared about alignment. He flipped back to his tracker that evening and noticed a beautiful thing. His O marks, the ones for partial efforts, were increasing. And that wasn't a failure. It was evidence of flexibility. He remembered a study James Clear had referenced about how people who plan for imperfection are more likely to stick with a habit. The key wasn't rigid discipline. It was recovery, adaptability. So he wrote a new rule in his notebook. Never miss twice. But when I do, learn why and adjust. This wasn't self-help fluff. It was behavioral architecture. He glanced around his apartment, the journal near his toothbrush, the walking shoes by the door, the post-it on the fridge reminding him, Beth architect, not the victim. Each of those a design decision. He realized now that we don't rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our systems. And systems are built deliberately. Later that week, James had a small presentation at work. Nothing major, but enough to stir his nerves. Normally, he would have coped with over-preparing and caffeinating and a cycle of internal panic, but instead, he tried something new. He opened his journal the night before and wrote a simple identity reminder. I am someone who prepares calmly and speaks with clarity. The next morning, he sat for 5 minutes in silence before the meeting. He wasn't chasing performance. He was becoming someone who performs with poise. And it worked. Afterward, his manager nodded and said, You seemed really grounded today, confident. James simply smiled, because the roots were showing, even if no one else could see how deep they ran. That weekend, James took a longer walk than usual, heading toward a part of town he rarely visited. The sidewalks were cracked and unfamiliar, but the rhythm of walking was the same. He passed a small bookstore with a chalkboard outside that read, Today's quote, People do not decide their futures. They decide their habits, and their habits decide their futures. He stopped, read it again, and laughed, because the truth had followed him all the way here. That evening, he began planning a new set of experiments, not dramatic lifestyle overhauls, but micro-adjustments. He wrote a colon. Try meditating for 1 minute after brushing teeth. Swap background TV for instrumental music during dinner. Stack thankfulness note onto journal entry. Just one thing daily. Keep dumbbells beside the couch. 1 rep minimum rule. He called this his habit garden, a space where small routines could be planted, tested, and grown without pressure. Not all would thrive, but some might take root. That was the point, because he understood now that atomic meant 2 things, tiny and powerful, just like seeds, just like votes, just like one clear breath beneath a maple tree on a restless afternoon. The coffee shop buzzed with late morning chatter, steam hissing from the espresso machine as James stood in line, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. It was Sunday, the kind of slow day that could so easily disappear into unstructured hours and subtle distractions. But James had learned something about days like this. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small folded index card. On it, 5 handwritten prompts. What one thing will I move forward today? 2. What habit will I reinforce no matter what? 3. What will I say no to? What am I grateful for? What identity am I voting for? The questions were quick, but they worked like anchors. He jotted short answers in the corner of his notebook. Outline new blog post. Read 2 pages. No aimless scrolling. Grateful for space to reflect. I'm a thoughtful creator. That 5th answer lingered with him, not because it was flashy, but because it was his, a label he had chosen, one that had started to feel more like truth and less like hope. Back at home, he propped open Atomic Habits again and reread a section that had stayed with him for days. Every action you take is a vote for the person you wish to become. And also, true behavior change is identity change. He wasn't just doing habits anymore, he was confirming identity. That shift from external goals to internal beliefs was where the transformation really began. He'd stopped thinking in terms of results. Now, it was about alignment. Am I acting like the person I want to be? That question echoed as he wrote the first few lines of his next blog post, titled The Daily Election. He described each decision, each moment of effort or resistance, not as a judgment of worth, but as a ballot. One choice in isolation didn't change much, but over time, votes stack, and eventually, a new identity wins the election. As he hit Save Draft, James noticed how much less he hesitated now. Writing didn't feel like a task. It felt like breathing. That night, after a warm meal and a short walk, he reflected on another subtle, powerful truth from the book. The cost of your good habits is in the present. The cost of your bad habits is in the future. More like truth and less like hope. Back at home, he propped open Atomic Habits again and reread a section that had stayed with him for days. Every action you take is a vote for the person you wish to become. And also, true behavior change is identity change. He wasn't just doing habits anymore, he was confirming identity. That shift from external goals to internal beliefs was where the transformation really began. He'd stopped thinking in terms of results. Now, it was about alignment. Am I acting like the person I want to be? That question echoed as he wrote the first few lines of his next blog post, titled The Daily Election. He described each decision, each moment of effort or resistance, not as a judgment of worth, but as a ballot. One choice in isolation didn't change much, but over time, votes stack, and eventually, A new identity wins the election. As he hit Save Draft, James noticed how much less he hesitated now. Writing didn't feel like a task. It felt like breathing. That night, after a warm meal and a short walk, he reflected on another subtle, powerful truth from the book. The cost of your good habits is in the present. The cost of your bad habits is in the future. It was obvious when you saw it clearly. Exercise feels like effort now, but gives you energy later. Scrolling feels relaxing now, but costs you sleep. Eating vegetables might be bland today, but gives you vitality next year. Every action, James now realized, carried a time signature. Some paid off now and robbed him later. Some cost him now and paid back with interest. He wrote one simple sentence in his journal: I'm choosing compound interest over instant gratification. He smiled as he closed the cover. The next day brought challenges: a pile of emails, 2 missed calls, a surprise client escalation that needed immediate attention. James felt the pressure. The old temptation rose: skip lunch, power through, collapse later. But then he paused, breathed, and remembered the phrase that had become his silent command. Be the kind of person who shows up with calm. So he stood up, stretched, and took his 5-minute walk. It wasn't heroic, but it was a vote. That evening, his sister called again. I started doing that thing you said, she told him, putting my workout clothes out the night before. I haven't worked out every day, but it helps. I think I'm finally understanding what you meant. James smiled, leaning against his kitchen counter. It's not about streaks, he said. It's about strategy. You make the right thing easier, the wrong thing harder. That's the system. She exhaled. It's actually working. Systems work, he said softly. They just need time. He hung up and poured himself a cup of tea. No TV in the background, just the gentle sound of the kettle, the faint city hum through the windows. And he realized something. He wasn't forcing these changes anymore. They were simply how he lived. And in that quiet realization, James saw clearly. He hadn't just built better habits. He'd started becoming someone else entirely, someone he trusted.